Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amol Dethe. I'm the editor of etcfo.com, which is part of Economic Times. And thank you for tuning in today for the ETCFO webinar on Corporate Governance 2.0. I'm sure you will all agree with me that this is a winter session, and I would say that warm welcome to everyone. It's bright sunny day in Mumbai and cold and breezy in Delhi NCR, where the other half of the team of ETCFO resides. Uh, like the difference in temperature in different part of the country, same as the scope of corporate governance, viewed as differently by so many people. This afternoon at the CFO webinar, we are going to discuss corporate governance 2.0, the best governance practices that the companies should adopt in 2020 to achieve the new milestones. And we hope that today's session helps decode the year gone by and helps you prepare for the year ahead. We have an outstanding speaker, an expert, and veteran to take this discussion forward. Uh, Please join me in welcoming Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti. Shailesh is a chartered and cost accountant, an internal auditor, and a certified financial planner and fraud examiner. He's a board chairman, audit committee chairman, and independent director at some of the country's most preeminent organizations. He's a well-known thought leader on the Indian economy and public policy. We will start with Mr. Haribhakti, followed by an interactive session. The participants are requested to send us questions on the private chat window to us. In the interest of using time productively, we will collate them and present it to the speaker. Also, at the end of the webinar, I would like you to spare a few minutes to answer a few of the follow-up questions on the brief of the webinar. It's going to be a brief poll. So at etcfo.com, we have been doing meaningful stories, not only catering to specifically CFOs, but also what matters to CFOs, specifically GST, corporate governance, audits, and so many other things. So let's begin. Over to you, Mr. Haribhakti. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to join all of you on this webinar on this bright sunny morning. But I must start by saying that the chief challenge today is to repair, preserve, and really disrupt the balance sheets that we are all engaged with. And by that I mean that we need to do these three activities for global balance sheets, national balance sheets of our cities, of our corporations, and indeed our own personal balance sheets. We've simply been fed with too much debt. The world is awash with debt to an extent that 25% of the entire debt of the world is today available at negative interest rates. And therefore, the biggest risk in the world has got embedded in the debt space. It is the equity space which is likely to give us the balancing act and enable retirement funds and long-term funds to actually stay afloat and create some return for the people who are participants in these very long-term funds. Governance will demand that two things happen. How do we repair a balance sheet? One, the quality of our assets has to be extraordinary. What does that mean? It means that we'll have to deploy the best in class technology available for the business that we are in. We need to make sure that these assets are enabled in such a way that they can achieve their maximum productivity. The chief challenge of the world today is to make sure that the actually existing assets produce to full capacity and produce at the most optimal productivity. But all this cannot happen if our human capital balance sheet is not repaired. And the key resource that organizations will have to bring in, curate, promote, assess, make sure that they have the ability to deliver on the challenges that we all face. We need to have a winning team. And finally, you need to have a purpose, a larger than life goal for the common good. And it is these three aspects which will finally separate the losers from the winners. It is critical that boards adopt a sustainability mindset. And what does sustainability mean in today's context? For sure, the key thing that boards need to get engaged with is make sure that they become stewards of the environment. The way we have seen plastic damaging our environment is something that puts all of us to shame. And it's not as if we don't want or need plastic, but we need to make sure that we handle the plastic, which is one of perhaps the biggest and best discoveries that humankind has made in terms of convenience, in terms of cost, and all of that. But we need to make sure that we are stewards of the environment and we don't permit single use plastic to clog up the spaces that don't need to get clogged up with that. And many people have taken small steps, like drinking out of glass bottles and out of cups, which do not cause a permanent damage to the environment. But it is these small steps which will finally add up to what every organization will perhaps be required to report on in a very short period of time on all its six capitals, the chief one of it being environment. And therefore, environmental stewardship has to get into the DNA of boards and into the sustainability thinking. Social responsibility, equally critical. How will you ever draw the best talents from the environment, from the economy, from the places that you need to attract people to come and work for your company? The only way to do it is to have a set of policies, processes, implemented actions which will attract people to be part of your journey. And for that, there is the need to become completely socially responsible. And to all of this, we must cap it with very high quality governance. And what does that mean? That you permit only a culture of integrity, a culture of reliability, a culture of trust to actually develop. And once you have it, then you chaperone it, you curate it, you add to it, you make sure that it is continually re-emphasized in order that it gets into the DNA and into the natural working and functioning of enterprises that you are part of. And therefore, this challenge is absolutely necessary to take head on. All of these three. And therefore, ESG will be the big ticket to fresh investment. I make bold to say that in 5 years' time, no investment will be made in India unless the receiving company is ESG compliant. And again, I make bold to say that in 5 years' time, all financial reporting will evolve into integrated reporting on six capitals. It is crucially important to take the next big step for boards on succession planning. Because how will you make sure that the talent that you will require to make all of this happen is always available to you if the board does not have effective succession planning processes? And it is for this reason that the role of the Nomination and Remuneration Committee has become extremely important in today's corporate environment. Because the remit of this committee has now been expanded to make sure that succession happens effectively, not only at the highest levels, at the CXO level, but also at all the KMP levels and the SMP levels. So all the people who will drive the future of the company need to come under the umbrella of the performance management system, the appraisals, the ability to judge one from the other, the ability to make sure that the right people are presented with the right opportunities, and these two are matched on a continuous basis in a way that will redound to the success of an organization. For this, the Nomination Remuneration Committee has to spare enough time to know these people. And not only these people who are in this cohort of SMPs and KMPs and CXOs, but also the rising stars of the company. Because it is from this pool of rising stars that the future SMPs, KMPs, and CXOs will be chosen. And therefore, this remit has become extraordinarily large. Then let us take what is it that enables the corporation to take risk. It is only if you have an enabling vigilance mechanism which will point out the danger marks to you at all times, flag them before they turn into a cause for action. Much before that happens, if you are in a position to course correct, to make sure that you get back online, compliance is not an option, it is an absolute mandate. If that philosophy prevails in a company and is supported by very effective systems, processes, digitized controls, excellent processes for internal audit, statutory audit, looking at risk management in an integrated organization-wide way, looking at cybersecurity as a very special emphasis, and making sure that whistleblowing happens at the right time, and that there's a digitized compliance mechanism installed in the company, which will red flag potential dangers before they become absolute non-compliance. And it is only when such frameworks are in place that you'll be able to leave management free to actually take the risks that must be taken to grab the opportunities that are presenting themselves in what I like to call an abundant world. While in the near past we've been struck by so many black swan events, in fact, the world has become amazingly abundant. And there are several technologies which are exponential in their drive, in the way that they will change our world, which we need to take cognizance of and bring in a converged manner into every organization that we can actually influence. Let me give you 2 or 3 examples, but let me start with the redefining of purpose, because everything stems from there. So take Microsoft. At one time, Microsoft's objective, purpose, vision statement simply said that we should have a box on every table, and that box should work through an operating system that we have produced, and we will upgrade at all times, and people will keep paying for that. As soon as the new CEO took charge, within 6 months, he redefined the purpose. He talked about hit refresh in a book that all of us have read. And he talked about the purpose being to empower the digital journey of every human being. Whatever digital choices you make, Microsoft will empower. Now that is a very different purpose which serves humanity in one of its most critical needs, its interface with each other. As I keep saying, there are only 2 things that connect all of humanity. One is the air we breathe, and therefore, the minute you do a few breaths together, you feel connected. And the other is the internet. And therefore, if there is one big thing that I would like to see happen, is to see connectedness on an ongoing, costless way for everybody to make sure that they can achieve the purpose that they choose. Starting from there are technologies which will get us to human scale artificial intelligence. Big data is getting collected every second. The quantum of data supported by cloud infrastructure that has been created by the world is so huge and so humongous that you can contextualize in the context of your business model and in the context of your competitive environment, both internal and external information, in a way that you'll be able to take decisions that will raise your market share, raise your productivity, and therefore raise your profitability and keep you in a sustainable mode. Having seen all of this, there are, for the social responsibility piece, a whole lot of advances that are happening in robotic surgery, in additional immunity for the entire human race, in detecting grievous diseases much before they become grievous, and making sure that you can address them with a cure. The amount of dollars which is being committed to this is just simply huge. Automation of everything. You can now think of an entire warehouse in a pharmaceutical company which has no human intervention. Everything happens remotely using a dashboard and using controls like you use in a video game to make sure that goods and processes move automatically. The entire banking universe is getting democratized because of the connection that information technology is providing. Blockchain will not remain an esoteric otherworld idea. It will become part and parcel of banking. With all of these technologies converging, we will see coming out of this black swan driven world, I call it a growth depression world, a world which we can seek abundance in. And I believe that the task of all great managements is to work towards that abundance to make sure that the world gets the value of all this productivity. Just look at it. Take a simple example of agriculture. Today, the given wisdom is that you need to cultivate crops in large fields. You need to use fertilizers and pesticides, and you need to use all this heavy equipment and all of that. Consider what will happen if you dramatically transform to vertical agriculture in urban areas, in the flats we live in. Imagine what would happen if all the food that we need could be grown in your home. That is what is being experimented with as we speak today in China in 400 locations. There's no reason why in India we should not adopt vertical agriculture as the 10x productivity deliverer for our country. Or take IoT, for example. 2020 will be the first year in which the world will have more than 1 trillion sensors. So just imagine 1 trillion sensor world interacting with 7 billion human beings to deliver exponential value speedily, effectively, costlessly. What this can deliver are the 4 Ds that I am very fond of mentioning. Dematerialization. So much more from much less, lesser utilization of material. There'll be a day in our history, in our lifetime, when we may not need to produce some of the things that are causing us environmental distress at all, because you could recycle, reuse, and remake what you need. And this can extend to building materials, it can extend to plastic, it can extend to steel, it can extend to a whole lot of areas. The second D is demonetization. Because if you produce to high productivity and high scale, then naturally the money value will go down. Third D is delocalization. You don't need to necessarily produce things, as I mentioned, in a rural area. You could do the same thing in an urban area in different circumstances. Provide the water hydroponically, make sure that water is not wasted, make sure that the nutrients are delivered, and all of that through jets and through automated systems that you can put up. And finally, democratization to make sure that the entire set of people who need to consume, who must have a service, have access to it, have access to it at an affordable cost. And it should not matter who picks up the cost. The cost will be incurred in a way that abundant availability actually materializes so that the entire availability becomes democratized. So if you can imagine a difficult world scenario, coming out of it by welcoming and embracing these exponential technologies, you could see how you can progress towards a world which is abundant. And it becomes the remit of boards to actually do the disruptions and actually create the enablement which will make sure that this promise will be fulfilled. So, friends, while we are in a difficult situation, the geopolitical situation around the world is very difficult, the social situations are getting tense, there is still a whole lot of hope because technology can deliver abundance. And with that conviction, I open up this webinar and you can ask me questions from the entire range of subjects that we've covered, to talk about current situations, to talk about future, and I am very happy to answer these questions. Thank you very much.
Uh, so great, sir. That was a remarkable perspective that you offered, specifically, not specifically about the corporate governance, but the overall ecosystem, starting from the sustainability of the business, how to recognize the assets and the plastics and the environment, and the current geopolitical risks. So I'm happy that you allowed to ask any questions. So when we speak about geopolitical risks and the current challenges, my participants have already started throwing questions. But before we get in sync, I will just ask you one or two questions on the current situation. One is, sir, just share your learning with us specifically on the Tata Sons and Cyprus Mystery case. What went wrong there? Where do you see this episode going? What precedence it is setting for the corporate India? Because Tata Sons is not only the company which is important for India Inc., but that company is important for India. Whole world knows Tatas. And when this episode took place, tell us something about it, sir.
So, if I take a step 4 years back, the question that arises is whether the succession planning that was attempted was complete when just Mr. Mistry was appointed to chair the board of Tata Sons and was not simultaneously given charge of the Tata Trusts, because the Tata Trusts own 66% of Tata Sons. And therefore, that part of it remained open. And what might have been a wisdom driven, execution driven partnering did not quite work out that as it was anticipated. And therefore, the differences led to a situation where it became difficult to continue without actually making sure that Mr. Mistry left the chairmanships and indeed left his board membership. The manner in which this was done has been the subject matter of grave debate. It is quite striking that a person who was very recently recognized as having performed well was requested to demit office. I mean, virtually with no notice. So that's a question that will be debated, and that will be we will see the Supreme Court giving us answers to that. The issues that arise are: who is a majority? How should the will of the majority get expressed? Who is a minority? Is a minority embedded with certain rights? Can those rights be abrogated completely? Do they need to be in a conciliatory manner, in a manner that will create sustainability and long-term value, be brought together? Was there fairness and transparency in the whole process? And what ought to have been done to make sure that the existing rights of the minority do not get truncated? So these 5 or 6 issues will all come up before the Supreme Court. And I, for one, as a student of governance, is looking forward to the direction that the highest court in the land will give, to make sure that we then have a clear path as to how to conduct the affairs. And in the meantime, there should be business as usual. The ideas of raising productivity, making the investments, taking the risk should continue. But we must learn the lessons so that the long-term sustainability of large and important, systemically important organizations like Tata's remains sustainable. And my belief is that we will find that path.
Uh, Very interesting insights on this particular case. But in last couple of years, or specifically if you look at 2 to 3 years, we have seen many issues. I'm not even talking about the NPAs or the bad loans; those were absolutely different issues. But the issues that took place, for example, in ICICI Bank, the Chanda Kochar issue, the Axis Bank, the Shikha Sharma issue, and the Indigo promoters issue. Uh, and what is surprising here is most of these people had received the award of corporate governance years after years by many organizations. So that was, and when all these issues came into public, and when we published them, the questions were raised. So when these kind of issues happen, specifically at the large companies, I'm not even talking at the small companies. One, sir, what goes wrong? And why it's been followed for years? Because if we look at this particular case which is coming today, it's not that it just happened yesterday. It's been happening since months and years, and suddenly it comes out. So what goes wrong, and where are the mistakes that the companies make?
Well, every situation is different, and therefore there's no one prescription that will remedy all the ills that we are seeing. The ultimate goal is to make sure that mindsets are so changed that integrity, belief in purpose, and belief in the ESG framework becomes embedded in every person who is part of an ecosystem. That is the ultimate goal that all of us wish to see happen. In the meantime, everybody will have to get more deeply engaged and also become more responsible. And everybody, including the press, and everybody will have to take a responsible stand, and a stand that will make sure that it will result in delivering that ultimate good that all of us collectively want to see happen. So we need to intensify. We need to make sure that the preventive controls are strengthened in a dramatic way, relentless way. We need to make sure that whistleblower mechanisms work. We need to make sure that systems and processes that are laid down are followed, not in the letter, but in the spirit. And this is the work that boards, CXO teams, KMP teams have to work together in a concerted, collaborative manner to make sure, so that the vigil is strong, the controls are strong, the enabling environment is strong, And therefore, people are left free to take the risks, which will bring in this superior value that we've been talking about to acquire abundance in our country. And it is possible to do that if all of us work together.
Okay, so obviously I have list of my questions, but I will obviously take the questions from the participants. They already started shooting some questions. The question that I would like to ask you here, which I received from the participant, is, can you expound and delineate the role of legal counsels in corporate governance? Ultimately, everything lands into the legal matters. But what in your mind can be the most critical contribution of a lawyer in corporate governance?
Very good question. I think there is a um, partnering role that lawyers I have seen always play. The lawyers that I have sat on the boards that I sit on with have been extremely powerful contributors to making sure that a situation is seen in the light of whether there's any potential non-compliance with the law or any potential problem that may arise either to reputation or to the strict rules that are laid down. And that proactive role, when a matter is being discussed and debated, is to my mind the single most important contribution of the lawyers who I have worked with. I've also seen exceptional lawyers chairing committees which are compliance committees. And I've seen the expert way in which legal process optimization, making sure that it is all put into a digital framework, making sure that the accountability. Now you can imagine what happens. There is a solicitor, chairman of a compliance committee, who makes sure that there is legal process optimization. So lesser delays, lesser time taken to close issues, making sure that compromises happen where they are more sensible to make, making certain that the right person is always available, fully briefed, prepared to make sure that the matter of the company will be attended to. Now I've seen now a new area opening up where legal portals are being created to track every legal matter that a company is engaged in. And it is the lawyers who make sure that the legal portal has all the inputs that are important to make sure that an organization remains completely compliant.
Okay, meaningful. I have another question from a gentleman called Raju Mitra. He has raised a very valid, I believe, a very important point here. He says it is difficult to adhere the compliance in the system in case someone are not willing to adopt, which leads to failure, especially when some brains at senior management or board are aligned to one goal, which can lead to issues later on. What are your suggestions to enable certain things which can be effective for all corporates to address and specifically for growing corporates?
Well, you know, as I see digital compliance systems evolve, I'm seeing that you can actually break down every law that is applicable to you and every regulation that is applicable to you to distinct processes which need to be manned and fulfilled by individuals who are responsible. And the best antidote to a desire to non comply is one, education, awareness, making sure that people understand the value of it, making sure that the push of culture, this whole idea of there is complete intolerance to non-compliance, as it gets pushed down, people get the message. But most important is where something is discovered which is not in line with the company's philosophy or culture, the punishment should be swift, exemplary, and made known to the entire organization. So we did, for example, in one company, a 20,000 person single communication through a satellite which we took time on from Doordarshan. and 20,000 people in the company heard at the same time the value, the cultural value of effective and not vindictive whistleblowing. And the message got conveyed that the organization will support and react to and be serious about complaints which are genuine and will not tolerate complaints which are frivolous and for any personal motives. And therefore, this whole mechanism to have it communicated on this widespread basis is the challenge which needs to be taken up to make sure that the questioner's point does not get diluted because somebody wants to take a shortcut. And that is the remit of the board as a collective oversight function.
Okay, interesting. I think it's going really well. I'm getting some more questions here. So there is one more suggestion or a kind of a question which is raised here is the impact of shareholder activism on board decisions is good of a corporate governance as board is entrusted with responsibility to protect interest of investors. Your views, sir.
So there are two sides of the coin of investor agitation, as you're putting it, or investor activity. Now, the other side is investor relations, engaging with investors in all forums and on a continuous basis, in order that the point of view of the corporation is transparently and fully available for somebody to take a call. Most of the time, the activists are not fully aware of all the steps that are being taken by the corporation in the issue that they are agitating for. And therefore, it becomes the remit of the investor relationship activity of the company to make sure that this communication is continuous, full, and exemplary in terms of making sure that the investing community is familiar with what the intent is. That, to my mind, these two sides of the coin need to be carefully balanced, and the investment connect activity has to be conducted at a sufficiently high level by people with responsibility, with knowledge, with data, with empowerment to make sure that the relationship gets built in order that if a difficult situation arises, the trust in the organization remains, that they will very quickly disclose what the transparent truth is. That is the key thing that needs to be accomplished.
Okay. The another question is specifically on the roles of top management, specifically chairman and MDs. So the question is, what is your view on the recommended separation of chairman and MDs profiles? Is it the most ideal situation across all companies? For example, SBI may continue to merged role as CMD.
So let me say that the US view is that it has to be horses for courses. So the US view is that there are certain circumstances, and I think the list of those circumstances is rising, where it is appropriate to separate the role of the chairman and the managing director. Because the chairman is supposed to set agenda, set direction, make sure that the communication, the ideas that are brought to the board and all of that are appropriate, they're fully discussed, and appropriate decisions are taken. Whereas the remit of the managing director is to hold custodianship of the control systems, of the culture, of making sure that the execution happens in the way that it is supposed to happen. And because these roles are so distinct, it is felt increasingly across the world, but there are exceptions. There are cases in which these roles need to get blended. And the exceptions which I have seen most often come up are in state-owned enterprises, in situations like the State Bank of India that you pointed out. In fact, there is in the law, the State Bank of India Act calls for a chairman and managing director, because at that time that was the given practice. Now things have evolved. In India, on the other hand, the Uday Kotak committee took a view that come 1st April 2020, the separation of the chairman and the managing director must happen in India. And I think now people are working out plans to make sure that this separation is done in a seamless, smooth, and a sustainable way. So I think corporate India has taken a very positive view of this and has begun to plan and take action to make sure that this transition happens in a smooth way. In Europe, for example, it is given wisdom that the position of chairman and managing director should be separated. So we are actually following more closely the European point of view.
Okay, since you mentioned about the Kotak committee, there is one important thing he had mentioned in his the report that in finance the fittest and best governed will survive. That's in fact a very important one, and I'm sure you agree with it because you're also on the same
Completely.
page. Yeah. How do you think one can achieve it?
Engagement. If you ask me one word, I think we need to all deeply engage with the purpose. What is the purpose? The purpose is that we want the entire nation on a complete, nobody excluded basis to receive the benefit of the actions that all of us take collectively. If that is the purpose, then we need to make sure that it works through our CSR, through our environmental actions, through our social responsibility actions, through our productivity, profitability, digitization, technology, empowerment, all of these areas coming together. So the one word answer is deep engagement, continuous engagement, and full transparency and full uh, disclosure on what actions are being taken to deliver that overall value from the working of every entity.
Okay, quite interesting. Sir, I have been listening a debate about principle-based regulations and rule-based regulations, and there are different views on this. The question that I have received from someone called Sanjay Kasture, the participant, I think is on the same lines. He's asking us that do you think too much of regulations and laws in place are creating roadblocks in the business, and instead we should create an environment of self-regulation?
So I have been a great believer in self-regulation. And ultimately, what is sustainable is going to be all of us on the journey of compliance, of engagement, of making sure that we fulfill our roles, our fiduciary responsibilities in a way that the community will benefit. That is the ultimate goal. But while that journey is happening, to make sure that the inclusion happens through the entire universe of companies. In India, we have 6.5 lakh companies. Each one of them needs to have some pegs on which to hang their hat on. And that is why we need rules. Now, if we can evolve as we actually start adoption to a situation where the normal natural rules, great accounting, great disclosure, great interaction, transparent, making sure that the bad news is communicated without letter hindrance, unless we get that into our DNA, we will not have a purely principle based regulation which we can adopt. So, while we are on this journey, rules are enablers. Ultimate goal has to be that it has to be principle driven and it will then get embedded into each one of us to make sure that we will all be custodians of that self regulatory mechanism which will deliver clean value to our environment.
Right, value of the environment again is a very important part. I have a question here, from Lady Usha Iyengar, and the question is, as you referred about abundance, Why can't Indian companies produced at the reasonable cost and with such features and variety the way Chinese economy does? So India is always compared with China. So I think on the same lines, the lady is asking us,
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason. Perhaps her question is very pertinent. There is nothing stopping any Indian company to adopt aggressively technology which will deliver high productivity. Absolutely nothing. It is just intent. And as I see, things are beginning to change because now the level of tolerance to low productivity and non-compliance and lack of sustainability is of an order where change has to happen. And it is happening. So, to the lady's question, no reason why Indians should not do it. All that we need to do is to encourage it, make sure that the right investments take place, and we make sure that we get onto the journey without any let or hindrance.
Right. So, in your opening remarks, you mentioned about technology, specifically IoT, blockchain, and the way, in fact, auditors and tax experts and even most of the companies are using the technology. I mean, with the proliferation of technology, every company is going digital. So, on the same line, the question is related to corporate governance. That how are the technological disruptions like IoT, RPA, data analytics, etc., can have an effect on corporate governance?
So, let us take IoT as an example. This is a very important, interesting situation. Let me give you an example of how IoT can transform manufacturing. So take a process like a pharmaceutical company's manufacturing line. The key input is to make sure that at every stage in the manufacturing process, weighments of the materials that will go into the composition of whatever is being produced, a liquid, a tablet, or an ointment, has to be very accurate. And therefore, all weighing scales along the entire manufacturing setup must work first. And two, work with the accuracy which is in line with the tolerance which is possible to accept in the mix of the final product. Now, how can you accomplish this without an embedded sensor in each weighing scale? It's simply very, very difficult to do. And that is why there are so many inefficiencies that creep into the manufacturing process. If you find that at the end of a batch, the batch is not in line with the composition mix that was intended, you have to reject the whole batch. And God forbid, if that batch goes into the market, then the whole business of recall and all of that happens. So the costs are humongous. And therefore, the only way to make sure that this cost is not incurred is to actually adopt IoT, put in those sensors, have the dashboards, be alert to where the weighing is either not happening and therefore correct it immediately, or not happening accurately enough and therefore change or recalibrate in a way that the process does not suffer. Now, if you have a manufacturing process which has all this enablement, then imagine the quality, consistent quality, high quality output which gets delivered every time. That is the delivery of IoT. Now, this is a very simple example which I've given you. Now you extend it to every aspect of a manufacturing situation, the feeding of raw material, the speed of feed, the mix of feed, the speed of the machine, the speed of the way the processing happens, the way that it is extracted. All of this can be subjected to sensor driven independent control from a remote location and an immediate self correcting mechanism to make sure that least disruption and the highest quality is achieved. And then you see what happens to productivity. With the same assets, with this incremental investment in IoT, a huge amount of productivity gain can happen. And this, take another example. I'll give you spare parts. Now, many manufacturing systems sometimes get held up because a critical spare suddenly breaks and you have not kept that in inventory. Now imagine that you have on the manufacturing shop floor a 3D printing capability which will enable you to 3D print that spare and make sure that the line restarts immediately. The kind of cost that you can save is so humongous, and the investment is nothing. It will get paid for in no time. That is the holy grail that technology can now enable us to envision and bring to the fore and actually make happen. And therefore, I believe that if boards do not support these investments, then they won't happen. And it is so critical that productivity, asset utilization, and making sure that high quality is delivered every time a product goes into the market. And therefore, that's the big role that boards will have to begin playing.
Very important anecdote here, specifically the relationship between CFOs and boards. And since we are catering to CFO as a community, and most of our participants are also from the same, could you elaborate more on what kind of relationships and how the relationship CFO should develop with boards so that they can build the best corporate governance?
Excellent question. I think this is a very critical part of the equation. How does the board make its decision? Decisions are data led. Who provides the data? Who provides the context? It is the CFO. And this is the symbiotic relationship between a CFO and the board. Not only should the data be presented on time, but there should be a readiness to make sure that the way that that data is collected, collated, and put into the board's frame of reference is with all the talent that the CFO can bring to the table. And therefore, the role is not in enabling the data processing system to work, but in actually analyzing the data to make sure that it gives the right kind of enablement for a decision to be made. And that's why the relationship between the CFO and the board is so critical. I must say that the CFO, the company secretary, and the managing director, all three play an extraordinary role in making sure that a board can actually perform the role that it is supposed to perform, which is remain sentient, remain a witness, and remain a custodian. Without the help of these functionaries who are responsible for various aspects, it is impossible for the board to actually function and meet its level. So crucial is the role of the CFO.
Right. So we are, like 5 to 7 minutes are left, and there are still many questions, but I will just try to, take one or two more questions. So obviously, many things have changed in last couple of years after this big incident that took place in the corporate India, and now 2020 is going to be not only a new year but a new decade, and kind of a very glossy year. So, considering a new year, the beginning of the new decade, how should CFOs ensure transparency, accountability, and security when it comes to corporate governance? Looking at and considering whatever happened in 2019-18, all these big places, the learnings they should carry in these areas specifically going ahead.
Again, an extremely important question. And I would bring to our table the concept of a knowledge management system. See, many times what happens is that uh, discussions happen around a board table, but not all of them either need to get minuted or may have deep implications in terms of competitive intelligence to if they're recorded in the public minutes. But there are knowledge management implications which come out of the debate and the discussion and the insights that emerge as conversation, engaged conversations happen at the board. So in many cases, we are now recommending that those outputs from the board's deliberations should move into a knowledge management system. Indeed, for every part of the organization, these kind of outputs that come out of considered interactions must move into the knowledge management system. And the CFO should have the access to this knowledge management system through analytics processes to make sure that curated, compiled, contextual inputs can actually go to the board or to any other forum of decision making, because ultimately we need to empower all decision making at all levels. Then we will see that the role of the CFO changes to a very creative, innovative role of setting the knowledge management system in place to make sure that it is available to take from when the need arises and when the demand is
So in fact, it's been an hour since we have been discussing this topic. It's been 57 minutes, and I want to take more questions, but we don't have enough time now. But I will do one thing. I will try to share these questions to you, sir, the questions that we have received, and we'll also try to incorporate the answers in the stories that we'll file on etcfo.com. But I must say, this was a very engaging conversation that I had with you and the participants. That brings us to the close of this webinar. As we close, a short poll will pop up for the attendees participants. Please spare a few minutes to answer the questions of webinar of the participants and the ETCFO team. I thank you so much, sir, for sparing time with us and addressing the queries in this webinar. Many thank you, sir.
all the best to all the CFOs and all the others who are participating in this wonderful webinar. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you. I also thank the webinar attendees, participants for their enthusiastic participation. I am still receiving questions. It was really your feedback that makes us tick, in fact, at etcfo.com. Many thanks. We hope to be back with you with another interesting topic. Please remember, we are in a digital world, and that's why this is a new way of curating news stories. We are not just writing stories, but bringing a speaker to you so that he can give you the answers to the questions that you have. Thank you so much from the CFO team.
Thank you. Thank you very much.